Haere mai, tautoko te kaupapa o te rānei e. Haere mai, haere mai.
At school, they were replacing the old lino, and bits of it were quite good, and I thought, so I cut bits out and then I carved birds, because I always thought of birds as being free, you know. So I made the birds, and they were just small ones, and I took them to the local framer. They should be presents for the family. And he looked, he said, "Oh, these are lovely." He said, "When I framed them, can I just exhibit them?" And he did, and to my astonishment, they bought every single one. So I had to use the money. Half of it went to pay him for the framing, and the other half went to do ordinary presents. Yeah. Well, this one was a favourite of Berry's, and it brought back great memories of Matodi Bay, where lovely friends invited us to come, and we'd all have our kids, and they had 4 and we had 5 at that stage, and we had such fun. And we're down the southern end of the beach. If you just went beyond the lagoon outlet, there was a rocky bank, and on it was growing this plant. Now, flax, harakeke if you're from south, kōrari in the north, and it had these just a couple of brilliant yellow leaves. And I just thought, oh, that's gorgeous. And so I couldn't wait to get home and to paint it. And because the flax had, of course, te rito, the whānau, well, that means the shoot in the middle. And so I've always been fascinated with it. I mean, how could you ignore it when your name talks about the part that ensures it continues? Flax, the fibre, was what was used when you said karakia. And so to imbue power from the spiritual world into the natural world. And all of these paintings, if you reverse them, you've got the spiritual image connecting with the natural image. So that's why they're all edged with red, because red was the tapu colour throughout Polynesia. Dad used to weave, but of course it wasn't a good thing to be Māori in those days. And so he wouldn't even let me watch him weaving. And he used to bring, if he had no contracts, he would cut a whole lot of the flax and he'd bring home, and he'd put water in the bath and put it in to keep it so that it's nice and pliable. And he'd just make a whole lot of kits. But while the bath was full of flax, we had to heat up the copper, and we had standing up baths. And Mum did not appreciate having to stand up to have her bath. When I went to Queen Vic, you learnt to do tarnicle. It wasn't the teachers who taught you, it was the senior girls. And I was fascinated because 80 girls, 80 different patterns, and yet the only elements in tarnicle are stripes, triangles, and a diamond, which is actually a pair of triangles with their bases stuck together. And that 80 girls would have 80 different patterns. Oh, it just blew my mind. Our pew had different designs according to where they came from. So I learned an enormous amount in those 4 years at Queen Vic. And the friendships made there gave me entree to places and events for the rest of my life. And so I began to haunt museum basements because the displays in museums only show you the front. And a weaver learns a heck of a lot from looking at the back. And so that interest meant that I met amazing people that were knowledge holders of their tribal areas. And they shared with me. And I thought, I've got to learn how to extract the muka. So I'm there sitting beside Digga Te Kanawa, and she was a group of women. They were all making muka, and I'm trying so hard. And she leant over and she said, Toi, make friends with your flags. And I thought, of course, if you're working with a friend, life is much simpler than if you're working with an enemy. And so I relaxed, and I just did the shell, and all the muka fell out, and I went, hallelujah. They all knew it long. At long last, Toi had got it right. Yeah, so I've said that to people ever since, especially the stroppy ones. Make friends. I first saw the statue, the carving, Uenuku, precious to Waikato, and in the Tawamutu Museum, and the image never left my head. And then, of course, I had this image. It was a tarnicle pattern from an ancient cloak. And I thought, yes, I can reproduce the power of Uenuku by painting it. And Berry had said to me, dear, why don't you do it at school? And the children can see how a painting can develop. I thought, how am I going to do this graph? I'm not going to draw it on. And, yes. So I put tacks in. The width of the stripes all the way around it. And then I got a cotton reel and I did the cotton backwards and forwards and all the way around to make a graph. And then I painted in between the cotton. And of course I did the black first. And the kids used to come at playtimes and lunchtime, and they'd sit on the windowsills and look in. And then, of course, when I got up higher, they said, hey, Mrs. Maihi, it's moving. And I said, yes. Hey, but paintings don't move. I said, you can make them move. So the old Maori patterns, they weren't just a visual language. Even though they weren't actually moving, they could give the impression of movement. Because when you walk past this, you look at it and it's a complicated, what the heck's she on about? You turn your head and you suddenly see it's waving. And so I got used to people looking at it, puzzled, and then turning their heads and then taking another look, and then walking backwards and forwards in front of it. I had taken a workshop at Whanganui Polytech. By this stage I was in demand up and down the country, so that's how I got around, was because I was asked to take workshops in Polytechs and that kind of thing. And that's where I met this wonderful fellow, and he was making paper. And I was amazed. And I thought, I wonder how fine you could go. So this was the second most finest I got it finer than that, and that's on those little waka over there. But yeah, so, and I love the way it just responds. You just walk past and it kind of waves at you. It acknowledges that you're there. But I made it for the Ngāti Kahungu festival, spring festival, when one of the cousins down there rang up and said, "Oh, Toi, we want something special as the centrepiece for this festival. And we know you do these wacky things, so send down something." So I made a cloak for them, because I thought when people come around it, it'll move and respond to them, and that'll be a real talking. But they were so terrified, they thought it was so fragile, they got a glass coffin thing and stood it upright, and so it didn't respond to anything. It was frozen inside the glass, so yeah. This one, it was interesting because after Barry died, I mean, we'd been together for 40 years and suddenly life was really different. All the kids had left home, the cat had died, the dog had died, Barry died, and there was me rattling around in this big house. And I found it very difficult to come out of my bedroom except to go to the bathroom. And so the kids began getting worried, and I got ordered to get out to the beach. So I drove out to Whātipu, and I was walking along the beach. It was a gorgeous sunny day, not a breath of wind. And then over my right shoulder drifted a cloud, a little cloud from the ocean. And in front of me was this small hill, and it had all this flax growing on it. And it came towards that hill, and it just suddenly rain pelted down from it, and the wind blew and flattened all of that flax, plastered it against the side of the hill. And then it went over, dissipated, and all of the flax stood up again. And I thought, all right, Barry, I'm going to be okay. I'm standing up again, and I'm not just going to go backwards and forwards between the bathroom and the bedroom. So I went home and I prepared the canvas in the studio, and the next day I started painting this. Mm-hmm. When I was asked to be the weaver, designer, weaver and tutor for the kohewhata marae, I dragged them all over the place and showed them what fibres and then how to harvest them. And I wanted them to see how beautiful all the different fibres were, and also to get them aware that fibre was what was used in cords to demonstrate the connections between the earth and the seen and the unseen. Because on the cloaks, they call the ones that come down, those are whenua. We usually cut it to whenu, but that's the same names for the placenta and the earth. And the aho are the ones, the threads that are twined across, and they connect everything. So aho or ako means connecting. And so I thought I'd put them all because I wanted to connect old knowledge with today, but I also wanted them to understand how important fibre was, that it connected earth, hence the stones, to the unseen. Some of these were made by students. I don't call them students, I just call them my weaving mates. Because I wanted to teach them how to make pukahiwi so they could make piu-piu for their action groups. And I thought, no, for the cloaks, to make them comfortable, I would split each one. And so they fall gracefully, they feel great, they move great, and people feel really good in them. So I've got students, and they've made ones for their whānau like that. And then, of course, now they want to go on to these. And it's all just the muka from the flax, there's nothing else. And, of course, up here, the whole kuta was used, and it's waterproof. And so that's what they often use, the waka, the paddlers, they would use those. It's much quicker to make than these. And so that is a good one to start them with. As long as we've got a lake or ponds where we can get in and harvest the kuta. Because it's not the part that shows above the water that's valuable, it's the part that grows in the water. I thought, it was as if the treaty, the Maori version of the treaty, was as effective as tissue paper. So I thought, I'll make a tissue paper kaku. So I did. And then I thought, now who were the knowledge? There were a number of people who gave me knowledge, and I was so honoured that they did so. And Sir James Henare was one, another, Taru Rankin, and a number of others. And when Sir James's oldest daughter Grace was dying, and she had bought presents for people that were special to her, and I was one of them. And so after the tangi, one of her daughters came and she brought the presents for me, and they were wrapped in tissue paper. And of course I'd started this tissue paper thing, and I thought, wonderful, I'll put those in for the special knowledge givers. And then of course there were, some of the chiefs would not sign the treaty. So I put a couple of black tags in, and then I thought, now hang on, Busby wrote the first two drafts of the treaty on this paper, and it belonged to the Town family. Nana was a town. So I got in contact with Elaine, who does all our whakapapa, and I said, have you got some of the paper? And she said, yes. So I put those in as tags around the neck as well. And then, because my great-grandfather on the Māori side was Erumete Patuone, he was a namesake of Patuone, and so I thought, I'll get his signature from the treaty and his brother, Tāmati Wakanene. So it's got my English and my Māori whakapapa embedded in that cloak. There was a big thing in the papers about New Zealand contributing an Anzac memorial to Australia before the next Anzac thingy. And so Kingsley Baird said he wanted to do these giant bronze handles on either side of the avenue. Aborigine there, so an Aborigine weaver to design the paving, and on this side me to design the paving. So I used takirua over and under two because it's a flexible weave and it's strong. And if you're dealing with other peoples, you have to be flexible, but you need to be strong as well. But then they asked me if I would do two kete for the two prime ministers, Helen Clark and the little fella over there. So I thought, politicians. So I said, all right, I'll get some kuta. It's beautiful, deep gold kuta. I'll split it open to weaken it, and I'll weave it so it'll look great, but it'll be useless, just like politicians' promises. So that's what I called it. But I didn't tell them, of course. So ever since then, I've made little politicians' promises. They're useless, but they look good. When we lived in Masterton with Dad, we were the only Māori family with a vehicle. And he had this old, left over from the war truck. So, and periodically we'd go out to the Riversdale at the coast and get kaimona, and then we'd have to take sacks. A sackful went to every Māori household, and then we had some. Then one time I thought, I'm going to leave some of the sacks behind, and then we could have time to play. Yes, well, Dad says, well, you too, where's the sack? I said, Dad, you've filled all the sacks. And he said, well, that's all right. And he slashed the holdfast of a big remerapa, and he just did a little cut across its wide part, and he put his hand in and broke all the spongy stuff and cut the extra tendrils off. So he had a long hollow serpent, And then he chucked that at us, and so stood there and held it open. And then he just kept throwing the power and filled this, well, that one, yeah. So it filled this hole. And then I realised, of course, that's what the mutton birds came to us each mutton bird season. Of course, he had a whanaunga in the Chathams. And every year he'd send up a poha with mutton birds in it. It was the first vacuum packing because it shrinks as it dries, and so it excludes all the air. And I thought, when I grow up, I'm going to make something totally useless with the kelp. So that's how they began, you know. And it's just lovely. You walk along the beach and there'd be a storm and there'd be these things, and they're all so different. And this one, they had such long tendrils on this one coming out from the main flat bit. I thought, oh, I'll try plaiting here. Yeah, so I did, and got this little pouch. And I wanted to draw attention to the ways in which it had been used in the past. But I was horrified when there were copycats, and they took the living plant. They had no concept of its place in nature, that it was a nurturing plant in the ocean. I just really like working with people and playing with all the wonderful fibres that are available with us in this land, and to demonstrate how vital it is that we make sure that we look after this land.